Hey, what is up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. Today we're on our third iteration on this habit tracker. Last time we added a dark mode toggle where you can toggle it between light and dark mode, and we also made it to where you can pop up this modal and you can enter in some stuff and select an icon. Even if you select another one, it always remembers your last selection. We also made it to where you can cancel it out and it will clear whatever you had selected. But now we need to actually populate these habits live, save them in local storage, and then also create a context menu. Here's the finished product, and the context menu looks like this. You can just click, and then it shows you the title, and then you can click delete habit, and it gets rid of it both here and in your local storage. Okay, so let's jump in, and the first thing we're going to do is actually remove all of these divs that have the habits here. Now let's copy this. We're going to use that in a moment here, because that's the same kind of setup we need in our JavaScript. So come here and let me get rid of all of these. So we just have the habit container. Okay, the next thing we need to do is come over here. Let's refresh, make sure that's working. Okay, perfect. We need to do a few things. The first thing would be when we come here, we want to actually add an event listener for this that then sees what is typed into our input field and figures out which of these icons is selected. So let's run down here and do an event selector. Let's see, let's do below our selected icon. And we will call this event add new habit button. I think we already have that up top, so we called it add button. So we selected that at the very top, and we'll say add event listener. We're listening for a click, and when that click happens, we don't need to take in anything, but we'll just do an arrow function syntax here, and we want to grab, first of all, the habit title, which we already grabbed the actual input field, and that was called new habit title. We grabbed from up top, but we want the value of that, so .value. The next thing we need to do is to loop through all of our icons and figure out which one has the selected class. So we can do something very similar to up here. So event, our event listener, let me just grab this down this way. And we want to say icons for each icon. We're not adding an event listener this time though. Let's see, let's remove all this. We're going to say if, and then let's say if icon, so that's the individual thing it's looping through, .classlist, .contains, and what we're looking for is if it doesn't contain, because we're going to exclude things first. And so you can do that by just putting this bang up front. So if it doesn't contain, and we need to add the class selected. So if it doesn't contain that, then we'll return. So the only thing that's getting past this will be whatever does contain that class selected, so the one that has been selected by the user. So for that one, we're going to, let's see, we're going to need to declare this outside so that we can reference it afterwards, or I guess we could return it as well, but let's just do this and say let habit icon, and we'll just declare it and won't set it to anything. Then we'll say habit icon, and now that is going to be equal to icon.querySelector. And what we're going to do is select the SVG itself, that tag, and then we're going to select the inner HTML. We could do this in a couple different ways, but we're just going to grab all the inner HTML. That'll tell us how to update the SVG to match whatever the user selected. Now that we've got that, we need one more thing. Each of our icons that we have as habits will have an ID associated with them, so it's easy to find them in local storage and delete them and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to create that. We'll say const, let's do habit ID is equal to math.random. This is a way to get a random number between 0 and 1. Then let's write a method in a moment here in our UI object that will be called add new habit. We're going to pass it a few things. We'll pass it that habit title, then we'll pass it the habit icon, and lastly, we'll pass it the habit ID. And then finally, we will go ahead and call the UI close modal that we made last time, and that will close out the modal because we're assuming that they've added the habit and they're good to go. Let's go up here now and run this add new habit. Let's go and add another thing. This should be our UI object. Yeah. So I'll come in here and say add new habit. And that habit will take in three things. It'll take in a title, an icon, and an ID. That's what we just passed it. We'll actually pass in one more thing in just a moment. But for now, when we add a new habit, in the UI, we need to create, first of all, a div for everything to kind of rest inside. In fact, if I add what I had copied from our HTML earlier, we'll come in here and this is the exact structure we need to create. So we can say const habit div is equal to document.create element. We're going to create a div, and then we're going to take that div and we're going to add a class. So I'll say class list.add. We're going to add the class habit because that is this structure we need to make. So let's get rid of this now. We've got that. Next, we need to add the button inside in all of this. So the easiest thing to do here will be to say let's grab our habit div and change the inner HTML. And we're going to change it to, we'll add backticks here so we can add this on several lines. And then let's just copy all of this in. Now inside here, we're going to add a data attribute called data-id, which is our own custom attribute we're creating. And we will add in here our ID. And then we'll do the same thing here, data-id, and then we'll do a title as well. So I'll grab the ID here and the ID there and change these to title. Now, we are adding user input into this HTML like I mentioned earlier, and then adding it, but it's inside a data attribute. It probably still is a good idea to purify this, but like I said, for right now, we're just going to leave it as is. We'll come in here, and we're going to add our SVG. So what do we call the icon inside here? Okay, so that works for now. Last thing we need to do is grab our div that everything is inside. What's that called? Habit container. We're only going to use it here. So let's go ahead and just declare it down this way. So we'll say habit container. So const habit container is equal to document.querySelector. And then we'll say habit container dot append child, and we're appending habit div. Okay, so hopefully you tracked that. Let's come in here and make sure that this all works. So I'll enter a habit and I'll pick an icon and then I'll hit add habit and there it is. That's cool. All right, and if I refresh, it should disappear because we haven't saved it to local storage or anything like that. So you might remember that last time we came over here and we added a complete button. Now let's try that. If I come over here and add a habit and add an icon again and come over here and I click it, what's happening? Because it's supposed to complete. Remember, it was doing that earlier. Well, the problem is that we've done the query selector for all the icons up top here, but these habit buttons, but they're not on the page when the DOM loads. So because of that, we can't actually select them or anything like that. So we need to find a way to select them in spite of the fact that they're not yet on the page. What we can do is run a query selector on the container that they sit in, which does remind me that we put this probably here and it probably should go up top because I guess I forgot we were going to need to change that up as well. So let's put this up top here so that it's available to us in more than one of our functions. I guess it's not a function, but it is an event listener. So we'll come in here, selected icon. Here it is at the very, very bottom. Okay, so habits.forEach, all this kind of stuff. We can't use it like this. What we actually need to do is do an event to complete a habit. And this habit can't look for the habits themselves because they don't yet exist. What it can do is look at the habit container. Now on this habit container, we're going to add an event listener here, and we're going to say we're listening for a click, and we do want to grab the event itself, and then we're going to run an if statement. We'll say if e.target is not .classlist.contains habit button is not there, then we'll return. We'll jump out of the loop completely. But the only ones that'll get through then will be the one that we clicked on. So what we want to do is run something we're going to call a habit checker. All right, and then we're going to pass it the e.target. E.target means the thing that you've clicked on, the event.target. The only thing that will get through then will be the habit that we've clicked on. For that one, we can actually just pull up what we've just done down here below and say habit.classlist. I guess it won't be habit. It will be e.target.classlist.toggle completed. All right, let's get rid of this and see if this works. I'll save it, come over to our console, make sure that it's showing up there. We enter something, add a habit, and then click, and it should complete. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, when I click anywhere inside the habit container, which is the box that holds all of our habits, check to see if the thing I clicked on has the class habit button. If it does, then go ahead and run this, add a class to it. Now the next thing we need to do is to save our habit. So we're going to come up here into our save area. We've saved our theme, we've checked our theme. Now let's go ahead and save habits. Now this is going to take in some value, so some item that we're going to pass it. It'll actually be an object, so we're going to pass it an object with all of the data we need attached to that. The first thing we want to do is we want to figure out what is inside our local storage already. Because if there's nothing in there, we can just save it directly. If it is there, we want to actually just push what we've added to what already exists in the local storage. So we're going to run something called const current habits is going to be equal to storage.getHabits. So we're going to write another method down below here. So we'll say get habits, and then we'll make sure to add a comma here. Let's declare a variable called current habits, and then we will run an if statement here. We'll say if local storage dot get item habits app dot habits. So we had a habits app dot theme, but now we have habits at dot habits. Hopefully that makes sense. If that's equal to null, so if there's nothing in there, then go ahead and set current habits to an empty array. Else, so if there is something in the local storage already, say current habits dot or is equal to json.parse local storage dot get item habits app dot habits. And so what it's going to return to us is it's going to take the string that's stored in our local storage and parse it to make it turn it back into an array for us. And then down here we're going to say return current habits. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and come over here to our console. Let's check to make sure there's nothing in there currently. Just have a theme, that's it. We'll come back here and let's just manually run save habits. Oh, I forgot it's in the storage.save habits. And it returns to us undefined. Okay, it gives us exactly nothing. Just to make sure this is working, I'm going to come back here and let's go ahead and manually add something so you don't have to wait for me to do that. We'll come in here and say like hi or something like that, and then we will run that habit again. Okay, so it's not working, and I'm actually not totally sure why. So let's leave it alone. We'll come back to it and see if we can fix that in a moment here. Let's come over to our save habits method here again, and let's go ahead and finish this out. That should tell us what's going on. So we're going to say if current habits, so that's whatever we've gotten back from that storage.getHabits, if that's equal to null, or if current habits is equal to undefined, or just nothing, I guess, then we're going to say local storage dot set item habits app dot habits. We're going to set that to json.stringify. So we're going to take this array and turn it back into a string, and then we're going to pass in the object. So we're just going to pass in exactly what we got when we came in here. Otherwise, we're going to say else. And then let's go ahead and grab this here. So in other words, if there is something already in the storage, what we want to do is say current habits.push, and we're going to push our object onto what already exists. And then we'll say local storage.setItem habits app stringify, and then here we're not going to pass the object, but current habits. Okay, so let's save this. And now we need to add a call to this save habits method in our event listener. Come all the way back down to add new habits. Oh, that's not my event listener. Where's my event listener? Add new habit button. Here we go. We've closed the modal. We've added it in the UI. Now what we need to do is actually create an object we can pass in based off the same things that we passed in here. So we'll come in here and we will say const habit is equal to title is the habit title, and the icon will be the habit icon, and the ID will be the habit ID. And lastly, here's one more thing we'll pass in a moment when we create kind of the completed class for our local storage. We'll come in here and say completed is equal to false. When we first create something, it's not going to be completed, obviously. And so we'll leave it at that. And then finally, what we want to do is run that storage.save habit method that we just wrote up above, and we're going to pass in the habit that we just created that object. So that when we click add, it will both add it to the UI and then save it in the local storage. So let's try it and see what our problem was earlier, because I don't think we fixed anything, but we'll at least be able to tell. Okay, save habit is not a function. Well, that's the first problem. Habits. Let's change this to habit. That makes more sense. Okay, let's try again. And we still have yet to figure out what we did wrong unless we did it right. Nope, we did it wrong. Okay, so at position 0, let's see what was here. Habits app.habit. Let's remove that and try one more time, just in case it had something to do with what we already had manually added. And now it is working. If I refresh, it's gone though. That's because we need to actually add some kind of load on a window where it looks in here and figures out what's here and then loads that. But it worked, so that's good because it saved it in here. Now, one of the cool things you can do with this habits app.habits, let's come up here to save habit. We're going to grab our current habits and we're just going to say console log, except not console log, we're going to do console table. We're going to console table our current habits. If you come here and I come over here and I save this, and then I run that storage.savehabits, and then I remember that I changed it to habit, and I do it again, and what we get is a cool little table, which is a nice way to see what's going on here. So here's our title, here's the icon, the inner SVG, here's the ID, and then it's completed as false. Okay, cool. So we've got it saving in our local storage. Okay, now when we save it, all of the habits are automatically already selected as having not been completed. Completed is false in all those objects we pass on. But what happens when we complete it? Well, you'll remember that we just created that new event listener that listened on the entire container. Let's find that. I think it's here at the bottom. Yeah, it listens on the entire container here, and it marks it as complete. What we need to do, however, is also pass that into our saved storage, our local storage, and check that as well. So come back here, and what we'll do is we'll create another method. We're going to call this storage.habit_status, and we will send it the e.target.dataset.id. So what we've done is whenever we click on one of those habits, we said, hey, I want the target, and then inside of that target, which is the button itself, I want to grab the dataset, which is data-id. So we're going to pass it that status, so we'll know whether which habit we're looking at. That will also tell us whether or not it's completed or false. Now we need to write this habit status up here in our storage. Come to the very top, we've gotten the habits. Now let's say a habit status. We're going to take in some ID from whatever habit we've clicked on. This will tell us to change that completed value on the object to false or true. So just like we did above with the saving habit, we're going to say current habits is equal to storage.getHabits. And so now we've got whatever is currently in our storage, and we'll say current habits.for each habit. We're going to say if the habit.id, so the ID of that object, is not equal to, now we could just put ID here, but it's actually passed in a string. And so what we need to do is say number and then put our ID inside here. So if it's not equal to the ID that we've passed in, just forget about it. So the only thing that gets through that if statement is the actual one that we clicked on. We'll write a little ternary to basically say if it was false, make it true, and if it was true, make it false. Completed or habit dot completed. If it's equal to true, then say habit dot completed is now equal to false, and then habit.completed is equal to true. So what we've done is said if it's true, change it to false, and if it's false, change it to true. And lastly, we will need to save that back to local storage, so we'll say local storage.setItem, habitsapp.habits, json.stringify, current habits. Okay, so if we come over here, let's go ahead and run our console log, or save habits. I guess we took that out. Well, let's not do that yet. So we'll say console.table, and then we'll pass in current habits so that we can see what's going on here. And then when we run this, we've got these things here, and you'll notice we got false, true. We haven't deleted anything yet, so it's kind of confused. Let's delete this and start all over. So we'll come in here and add a habit and hit plus. By default, if we come back over here and run this, you see we'll have our title, our icon, our ID, and it'll be false. Now, if we mark this and then we run it again, we should get true on that. So now we've got true. That's good. That's what we want. Because we're running save object here and we're not passing anything in, that's why we've got this empty area. So there's probably a better place to console log that, but for now, we'll just remove that altogether. In fact, I should have just done it in the console over here. There's one other thing on our UI before we can load things by default when we open up the browser to whatever site we've created here. And that is, we're going to write one more thing and we're going to call it refresh. Refresh habits. And this is what we're going to call on window load. We'll say const, let's just call them habits. We already have habits up top, I think. So let's do UI habits is equal to document.querySelector. And we're looking for all the things that have habit on them. And then we're going to say UI.habits.for each habit. And we're going to say we want habit.remove. So we want to get everything off the page. So this is just a great way to refresh everything. Take everything off the page, and then we're going to add back in the ones that are in local storage. So once again, we'll say const current habits is equal to storage.getHabits. And then we'll say current habits.for each habit that exists. So these are all objects. We'll say UI.add habit. Add new habit, I think is what that was called. Is that right? New habit. It's not helping me out. I think so. So it was habit.title we pass in, habit.icon, habit icon, habit.id, and then habit.completed. So these will be all the things we pass back into our add new habit. Now there's one problem here, and that is that when we created our new habit up here, we didn't add in the completed thing. That wasn't one of the things that was passed in. So we'll need to add that here, because by default, new habits that are created from scratch from the user here always are going to have completed set to false. But if we're using the same thing to load from local storage, we'll need to run some kind of little check here. So that's what we'll do inside the class here. And in this template string, we can write a little ternary. The ternary will take that completed status and say if it's equal to, let's see, I guess it'd be equal to true, then we want to add the class completed. Oh, we don't need a period there. We'll just add completed. Otherwise, we'll just enter an empty string, which will be nothing. It's not going to add a class. So let's save this. And then lastly, come down to our window load. Where is our window load? Here we go. And not only do we want to load the theme, but we want to update the UI. Not Chris, just the UI. Okay, and then we'll say UI.refresh habits, I think. Why isn't this thing helping me out? Yeah, refresh habits. Okay, so we're going to load can't read for each of null in refresh habits. That's because we have query selector up here. It needs to be query selector all. Let's try again. We save can't read property title of null. Okay, so we're getting this error. It tells us that it happens at our refresh habits up here and that it's in this array for each habit. So let's go ahead and come in here and say console log habit and see what we're getting. We refresh, we're getting habit. Habit completed, true title. So it does have a habit. Let's come back in here and remove everything from our local storage. I think it's because we were using that console log earlier, which kind of messed us up. Come back to our console here. Okay, yeah, so we're not getting the error anymore. Let's come then and add a habit here. And we hit add habit. It should show. Let me refresh. It stays there. And then because we are loading this and I'm console logging, let me remove this. Actually, let's do console table because that'll be cool. And what we'll do is not console table the habit, but console table current habits, just so we can see as we add new ones what that looks like. And I need to put it inside the actual function. Okay, there we go. So if we add another one here, habit, whatever, click plus, and now refresh. It should show us that as well. And come in here, add another one. And so this console.table is kind of a cool way to see what's going on, especially if you have large things that you're storing like this icon. You'll notice these are all false. If I complete some of these and hit refresh, they disappear, even though these say true. Okay, so let's refresh and try to figure out what is going on here. So these are all true. Let's see, when we refresh, we grab the UI, all the habits. We grab that they're completed. We've got that working properly because it's showing up here. We're passing it to our add new habit. So let's come up to our add new habit. Completed equals true. So somewhere in here is the problem because it should be keeping this class of completed on. The problem is we've made true a string here, and it shouldn't be a string because it's just a binary. So if I refresh now, yeah, there we go. So that works. So now it's actually figuring out, hey, that's equal to true as in the value true or false, and remembering that when we refresh. Okay, so cool. So everything is working except for our context menu. That's our right-click menu that shows the title and then shows delete. So the first thing we need to do is actually create that in the HTML and add some styling in CSS and then do a couple quick things in the JavaScript, and then we are going to call this done. Let's run over to the HTML then. And at the very bottom, I'm going to go ahead and add it all the way down here just below, just before the body closes out. We'll add a div with a class called context menu. And then inside here, we'll have two things. We'll have a paragraph tag with an ID of habit title. And then let's just add like a title for now. And then we'll come in here and add a button with an ID of delete. This will say delete habit. And I'll save that and it should show up over in our UI. If I refresh, there it is right there. And then let's run to our CSS and add a few things at the very bottom. So we'll need to grab our context menu. We'll say it needs to be a position fixed. We want it to be over everything else in the document. And so we'll do a z-index of like 1,000 and then a width of 200 pixels. So that'll be its own width. And then let's add a border of like 1 pixel solid red just so you can see what it looks like. I'll refresh over here and there it is, fixed on top of everything else. Let's set a background color. We'll do our var of primary and then a padding of our var of small. And then let's do a box shadow. I think it's the same one we did on the body. We'll just make it on the pop-up. We'll just make it a little bit smaller. Maybe this was the same size, I don't remember. And we'll use our var of shadow once again. So it should look a lot like that add new habit menu. And then let's change our border here to, now that we know where it's at, to 3 pixels solid, and we'll do a var of secondary. And then lastly, we'll actually do display of none because we're going to show this only on click. On click, we're going to add a class, so context menu.active, and that will say display of grid. Next, let's grab our habit title, and we're just going to add a before pseudo element directly on there. That will say content, and we want it to say title, a space, and then whatever the title is. Let's add a colon here too. And let's grab our delete button. For here, we're going to say font size inherit, font family inherit. Remember, this is a button, so we have to kind of remove some of the basic styling. Let's scroll down a bit. Background color, we'll set to our var of primary. And then our color of the text will be a var of danger. We're going to reverse these on hover and on clicking it. So we'll say border, 3 pixels, solid var of danger. And then a padding will be 0.5 rem. And then we're going to set a margin top on this, so it gives it a little space from what's above. And I'll show you this in a second here. So 0.5 rem as well. Cursor of pointer so that we can see, we can click on it and transition all of, let's do like 200 milliseconds, ease in and out. And lastly, when we hover over the button or when we focus on it, we'll say delete focus. We want to switch around our background color and our color. So let's bring these down here. And for our color, we'll change this to our primary. And for the background color, we'll change this to danger. Okay, so we've got it ready. I know you can't see it yet, but we will add a class here in JavaScript. So the first step is to add an event listener. We've already got all of these. Let's come to the very bottom and we're going to add our event for our context menu. We're going to add this habit container event listener. And in here, we're not going to look for a click, but for a context menu, which is that right mouse click. We'll grab the event itself, and then we'll come in here and say if the e.target.classlist.contains, and we're looking to make sure that we've clicked on a habit button. So if it doesn't contain the habit button, we will return and jump out of this. If it does, we want to prevent the default. So we'll say prevent default. And that will prevent it from doing its standard right mouse click. so we can show our own instead. For that one, we're going to say, first of all, we need to figure out which thing we've clicked on. Now, this is a little tricky, but follow along with me. The first thing we need to do is figure out which habit is behind the thing we clicked on. So let's come up top here, and while we're up here, we're going to grab a few query selectors. What we need to grab is we need to actually set something called let's do like habit to be deleted. All right, so we're going to declare up top here and then update it down below. Now we also need to go ahead and not just grab our cancel button, but we'll need to grab our delete. We'll also need the title or the actual context menu as well. So we'll say context menu, since we're already up here, is equal to document.querySelector, and we'll select the context menu. Okay, so we've got everything we need up here. Let's go back down to the bottom. And after we prevent the default, let's use that variable we just declared, habit to be deleted. I guess it's not necessarily deleted, but it's the thing we clicked on that we're likely clicking on to delete. So we'll say that is going to be equal to e.target, that's the thing we clicked on, .dataset.id. That tells us the exact thing we clicked on because it tags it by that ID that we gave it. Next, let's get a few things from the event. And we can use destructuring here to make that a little easier on us. So we'll say client X, and then we'll grab mouse X, and client Y, we'll set to mouse Y, and then equals E, which is that event that we passed in. Let's say the context menu that we declared up top, now we want the style.top to be equal to, and we'll set backticks here and add mouse Y, and then we'll add pixels. So it'll set the top of wherever we clicked, or the Y position to wherever we've clicked. And now let's set the X position. So we'll say context menu dot style dot left is now equal to same thing, except this time we'll do mouse X and set it to pixels there. And then finally we'll say context title is equal to document.querySelector. And remember we had habit title. And then it's just a matter of updating those different things. So we'll update the paragraph itself. That context title dot text content is now equal to e.target.dataset.title, which is the title that is attached to that button. And then finally, let's go ahead and activate the context menu. So we'll say context menu dot classlist dot add active. Okay, so hopefully you followed that. If I hit right click here, it should show wherever I've clicked, and it should actually give me the title of the thing I clicked on, and then update it to where this this text matches. I come down here, I click down here, and that works as well. Now the only bad thing is I can't click off any of these, and in fact, the only way to really make it remove is to either delete the habit or to click on another one and right click that one. So we do need to do a couple things here to make sure that that clears for us. Before we get to that though, let's make sure we can delete the habit itself. So we're going to write one more event listener that's listening for the delete habit button. And that one we're going to look for the delete button that we declared up top just a moment ago. We're going to add an event listener on it. We're listening for a click. Now remember, we've got that habit to be deleted variable we set up that's now attached to whatever we clicked on. So we can say storage.delete habit, which will be one more method we need to write, and we'll pass in that habit to be deleted. There we go. And then finally, let's go ahead and close down the context menu. So context menu.classlist.remove active. So once we delete something, it should close the context menu as well. Now let's run up top here and write that storage, let's see, habit status, get habits, here's where we're at. And we'll write the delete habit. That's going to take in an ID. And once again, we're going to say const current habits is equal to storage.getHabits. So we want to get whatever exists currently. And then we'll loop over those and say current habits.for each. We're going to take in two things here. We want the habit and we want the index. And we need to wrap these in parentheses here. And let's write this as an arrow function. We have to write a little if statement here that says habit.id, if it's equal to number ID, remember that's a string, so we're converting it back to a number here. If it's equal to the number, the ID we passed in, we'll grab the entire array, current habits, and then we will splice off at the index of that ID just one of the items. That's the only thing we want to take out of it. and it's a permanent change here to the array. To make it permanent for us, though, we're going to have to say local storage dot set item habits app dot habits, and we're going to set JSON dot stringify to turn it back into a string, and we're going to send it the new current habits array that we just altered. And then we need to find a way to actually change the UI as well, because that removes it from the local storage, but until we refresh, it won't remove it from our UI. So let's come back down here, and on this delete thing, we're going to not only add our storage, but we're also going to add another one on the UI, and that's going to pass in an ID as well. And let's come up to our ID and write one more here, and we'll call delete habit as well, and that will take in our ID. And then we're going to query select the actual DOM to find whatever has that ID. We can say const habit to delete is equal to document.querySelector, and the selector here will be our data-ID that is equal to the ID that we've passed in here. And then we're going to say habit to delete dot remove, and that will remove it from the UI, and then we will go ahead and run our refresh on the UI to populate everything again. So if I save here, this should work where I right click and hit delete, and it doesn't. Well, the nice thing is we know it's something we just wrote, and I think I see the problem here. These need to be backticks so that we can add that string. And let's save it and try again. So I'll delete the habit, and it deletes it. However, UI refresh is not an option. What did I call that? Refresh habits. Okay, let's try one more time. Now when I refresh, it will remove it because remember, we did remove it from local storage. Right click, delete, and it deletes it. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and remove our console log. Where's that? Our console table, so that we don't have that showing up every time. And now it should look semi-complete. We'll come in here and say habit, add a book title, book icon, something like that. If we refresh, it should stay there. Switch to dark mode, we can complete it. We can refresh again, it should stay there. I can right click, I see the habit title. I can click delete habit, everything works. I refresh, it's gone. We're going to call that complete for the third iteration. Hopefully the process of working through this is helpful, and you can see some areas we can improve this already. We could actually purify the thing that the user has given us to make sure we don't have cross-site scripting. We could add a counter that tells us how many times in a row that they've completed a habit. There's a bunch of ways we can improve this. We could have a clear all where it sets them all to not completed. So all of these things, this is how you just iterate on something, and hopefully the process of working through this was helpful for you. If you like this kind of thing, these are the kinds of things I like to do a lot on my channel. So please leave a comment, definitely subscribe so you don't miss things in the future. I try to post about 2 times a week. Sometimes I'm able to do 3. It just kind of depends on what I'm working on at the moment, how much client work I have, and all of that. So thanks so much for watching. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will catch you next time. Happy coding.